in the past. So.
Yeah, I think it's great. Well, it is 7, and I think we've got as many commission members as we're likely to get.
Yeah, I was going to just say with that, I'll call us to order and we'll do a roll call.
Okay, I'm sure who are watching from the website, which is just James.
All right. Hi, James.
I think you can hear us. Hi, James. Okay, everybody ready? Charles Watson.
Here.
Britta Mansfield. Here. Bob Woodruff.
Here.
Joy Hughes. Nina is absent. Deborah Berkel. Robin is gone. Brian Engstrom.
Here.
All right.
Quorum present.
And then we don't have any public comments. Is that correct?
No public comments.
Okay. Then we'll go on to that. We talked about the drafts of the 5-year plan.
Okay.
And, you know, I think I toyed with the idea of bumping this down to later in the agenda, because we do have at the end of our agenda, there's a request for an additional meeting before our August 27th meeting. And that is to review another application for adding a garage. And my thought process at the moment is I'd like to schedule a meeting before that August 27th, hear that, and then we'd have the August 27th meeting likely free to discuss our 5-year plan and start to put some priorities and action steps to that the 5-year plan that we've got. I really like what we came up with the structures and stories as a kind of framework, but giving more concrete action steps and timelines, prioritizing some, you know. I'll say probably every meeting developing an awards program is near and dear to my heart, but that might not necessarily be where our best priority is. So we'll talk about that sort of thing and how to prioritize that.
Can I make a suggestion?
Absolutely.
If for the purposes of your work plan, if you don't want to feel like you're talking for a while but not sure how long the other items are going to take, if you're interested, we could move the work plan discussion to be the last item either before or after the items from staff and items from commissioners, so that you're really just like, all right, we're going to talk right up until we're ready, and then because we have another meeting scheduled, we'll just call it down here. We'll continue this to the next one. And that way, if you kind of get tired of talking or to a good stopping point, you can do that, as opposed to worrying that you've got the City Hall one, which includes me giving you a presentation and you guys making a decision, and the moving review. So you have those other things. So if you want to, you could knock those out. Not that it's necessarily the reason to do it, but then also some of the people, if they wanted to go home, whether that's Brian or whether that's Doug, they would have the opportunity to do that. And I'm not telling you that you should do that. It's just an option. And I actually think for the discussion purposes, because your work plan discussion is fairly open-ended. And so I don't want you to.
No, I think that's a really good idea.
I said I toyed with it and you just convinced me. So yeah, let's and let's make that our standing procedure. We'll just, if we have action items, we'll have those, and then we'll just kind of keep that as our typical last item. And then if we don't have any action items, we can just bump that up.
We usually just start with continued business up front, but you can always rejigger it, especially for those open-ended ones for these things. But we'll try and keep that in mind. I think Melissa and I, between the two of us, we can talk to Rachel about that too and try and
then so Brian on the line here, is he another applicant with?
We have James is virtual, and so he's a case planner. He's actually the case planner for the historic moving review.
Okay.
But he was out of town for the last week or so before this, and so I ended up kind of getting some of the documents put together and published. And so I'm going to do the presentation, and frankly, he lives out of town, so coming down here just for this, because he works remote most days.
I was going to say, since we have attendees, we could flip our order too and do the moving review first and let them.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you'd like to start with new business 5.2, then go to new business 5.1, and then we'll go into. Do you want to talk about the special meeting request so that you can kind of get that into your consideration for the
for the
Okay.
5-year plan.
Okay, and then we'll go into
Does that make sense to
6.1.
everybody and seem?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody. All right. So I can do the presentation. So Melissa's printed off hard copies of everything based on some unexpected tech when we got here. You all have hard copies of both the presentation for the City Hall modification, which is case file HIS 24-0001, as well as this one, which we're going to do, which is HIS 24. And so I'm going to pull up my presentation on my side so I can see these, but you guys can follow along. You're welcome to stop and ask me questions. The presentation is going to be relatively short and straightforward.
You're doing the City Hall modification.
We're going to do the moving review first,
Moving-
and
moving
then
review.
the
Thank you.
City Hall modification.
It's 21 in the packet.
Oh, thank you.
Well done.
Starts on 20.
So you should, if you're following along on your own packet, the title slide will say Historic Landmark Review, Moving Review for Hudson House, or Hudson House. How would a local person say it? Hudson? Just making sure.
I think Hobson at George Fox, and it's like,
Ah.
not Hobson.
Okay. Okay, let's say Hudson.
And it looks like it's with page or slide 43 in the packet. For anybody who's looking.
And one of the things I would note for this, the packet that was published and made available online a week ago prior to today, something happened with the version controls when it was being saved. And so the slides you have now are the correct ones. And that published one had some inaccurate slides that had details that don't apply to a movie review. So that was brought to my attention earlier, so I wanted to call that out. I'm certain it was something I did, but I don't know how I did it. So I'm still not sure what happened. So going on, the background for this application, Doug is here. He's the applicant under Pacific Premier Trust to moving review for relocation of a designated historic landmark. So that's the Hudson House over at George Fox University. And it's going to be moved to another location in town. It'll be moved from 314 North Meridian Street to 600 East 2nd Street is what's proposed. So the noticing and other things were done with 314 North Meridian Street in mind. That's tax lot R3217CC 00100. It's currently in the institutional zoning district. The evaluation criteria that were used to look at this project included a couple of different things. We don't always use purpose as evaluation criteria, but it was mentioned one of the other ones we mentioned this time. So it's when you see NMC on the slide, that's Newburgh Municipal Code, or so NMC 15.344010. 344.015 Historic Preservation Commission Review, 344.020 Landmark Designation, specifically for subsection D relating to designation criteria, and 344.050 Alteration, New Construction, Demolitions, specifically for subsection C for demolition and moving review, and E documentation. So that's what we're looking at. On the next slide, this is just a location map. This is actually stolen from the application materials with a couple extra call-out boxes. Just showing where it is now and where it would be moving to. When this initially came to the Planning Commission, there was discussion with George Fox University. They were interested in demolishing the structure. And so there was some back and forth about the landmark status and some of the other things associated with it. And then this alternative and application came up as an alternative to demolition was to do a moving review to move it to another location here in town. The slide after that shows we're going to go through 2 slides of map series. And so the one on the left of these first 2 shows the North Meridian Street location on George Fox University. You can see it's mostly surrounded by parking lots to the east and the south. It's kind of a service drive area to the north, which actually leads to other parking lots to the north of that. And then on the right-hand side of the slide shows where it's going to be located on a lot that faces East 2nd Street. And so it's close to the downtown area. It'll be moved from that institutional zoning district to the downtown commercial zoning district. And it'll be kind of next to another kind of residential structure that's also right there. The next slide shows a couple of site and zoning maps. And so this is showing on the left-hand side, it's showing you're at George Fox University. It's in the I or institutional zoning district. And across the street from there is R3 or high density residential. On the right-hand side of the slide is the C3 zoning designation. And so that's that downtown commercial area again. And just to the south of it is again, high-density residential or R3. We're going to keep moving along. Description of the project. So mentioned it before, but what the slide just says is proposed project will relocate the Hudson House structure to an existing lot in Newburgh to avoid demolition of the structure at its current location. The applicant's proposing to move the historic structure to a new foundation at 600 East 2nd Street, use the structure as a commercial space at its new location, and maintain the building's historic designation. The building's exterior will not be modified with the move, and the interior will be refinished after the relocation is completed. So one of the things too, and I didn't get into this a whole lot, but we have some people who haven't been part of a quasi-judicial item before on the commission. So towards the end of the presentation, I will, if folks are open to it, I'm happy to go over a little bit about your quasi-judicial role, how that typically works for folks that are not used to it. There's also an outline that is kind of a cheat sheet that's available. If anyone wants a copy of that, just have a look at it. I don't think the Historic Preservation Commission has its own kind of handbook and rules, but the Planning Commission does. And the role you're in tonight, you're actually in a role that the Planning Commission is in regularly. So you're in a role where you're in an approval denial role. You get to look at an application, determine whether or not something is going to comply with the criteria that are used to evaluate it. And because there's a level of subjectivity, it doesn't just happen with staff. It goes to a body that the city is empowered to look at things that are not clear and objective, but are kind of fuzzy and subjective. And so that's when those things move up in those layers. So if there's any questions about that, I'll mention that again at the end, make space for it. We can answer questions too.
So I was going to say most of my questions, I think all of my questions actually are more procedural questions because we haven't done this before.
And that's fine.
Yeah,
I'm happy to go over that because you have it tonight, then you have it again tonight, and then you have it at your next meeting.
Yeah.
So whenever you decide to do that. So the next slide is a couple of site photos, just so we know what we're looking at. Oh, sorry. Along with the project descriptions mentioned here, it's common for us to include one or more attachments often on things, whether that's public comments, agency comments, application materials. So what was circulated previously was included with the staff report, the conditions of approval, and those sorts of things were the application materials. So those were published too, and that's pretty common. And those are going to be made available to you anytime these sort of things come up. So on the next slide, it shows the project site. So you see a view of the Hudson House from the outside. So again, that exterior is not proposed to be modified, but the interior has already been prepped for significant renovation. And that's what that site photo in the bottom right-hand corner shows. The top right-hand corner, which is enlarged on the next slide, is from the Historic Resources profile, or actually the Historic Resource Survey form. It was taken. So the historic resources inventory that we use here in the city is from 1990. But there was a historic resources survey conducted prior to that in the 80s. And this was identified in both of those. So we have the survey form as well as being identified and discussed in the inventory. It's typically referred to as field number 70. And it's considered to be part of one of our identified areas that's referred to as Nob Hill or Concentration Area A. So the historic resources inventory, if you all haven't taken a look at it before, it really is an inventory. What you're trying to do is log all of those important cultural assets that you have in the city that you have identified as historic landmarks. And some of them have more or less discussion associated with them. But one of the nice things about ours is even though the surveys are somewhat dated, those were already historic landmarks. So in theory, they captured the important stuff. And so you can go property by property and find some of the details about what makes them special. Why are they significant? And one of those is often the statement of significance that accompanies these. And I believe that what we have on this slide is the statement of significance. It says, this handsome vernacular cottage was home to Mr. and Mrs. Emery W. Hudson from approximately 1900 to 1938. They may have been the original owners, but title company records are inconclusive. The 1912 business directory lists Hudson as a druggist working at 606 First Street. The building is significant for establishing the historic character of the area and maintaining integrity of design and materials. So that's kind of the general statement associated with those. We'll go into some of this on the next quasi-judicial item too. And so this is one of the important things when we look back and say, why do we consider this a landmark? What's the point? There are some other things to note too. The inventory identifies this landmark as a secondary resource. So according to the inventory, secondary resources are properties which are not of outstanding distinctiveness or rarity, but are nonetheless of individual importance based on architectural, historical, and environmental criteria. So it might not be the A+ prime example we have in the city, but it's still important, still a historic landmark here in Newburgh. So the next slide. Did I repeat that? Looks like I repeated the location map. I probably just really wanted you guys to know where it was going to occur. Make sure that we're all on the same page. They're really a relatively close proximity to each other relative to the general area. So it wouldn't be getting moved too far. There will be a right-of-way permit required where we identify the route. So that's something that the applicant party has separately been in correspondence with the planning department as well as the engineering department. And part of that is because of some of the streets that will need to be crossed to get there.
Can I ask a question? What's on the current property? Just looking that up ahead of time. It's right next to the new Will Cutts real estate office, right? Is it just empty next to that? I don't know why I can't picture
If
that.
you, on your way home, go by, we just got it
Yeah.
cleared off today, you'll see.
Okay, okay, great. That's the one road I
Just
didn't drive,
after-
so.
Yeah, you know, it's pretty obvious now, that
Okay.
there's enough space.
Okay, great.
And that, what makes that house unique was when we started the discussion about saving, it was like, it's perfect width. I now have my setbacks, we're all, it just worked out.
Perfect. Okay, great.
It's a narrow
I
lot.
was wondering about that too.
That's a,
Yeah.
that's a perfect time for one of my questions.
Yeah,
Sure.
sure.
Go ahead.
Is what are we allowed to do ex parte, like go looking at things?
Oh,
What-
we should have read our disclosures already. We didn't. So we're
Yeah.
going to stop the presentation. We're going to do our reading. Now there's, thank you. That's a great question. And we skipped right past it because we're going into it. I apologize. I get a little, the roundtable setups are just a lot more casual. So it's easy to jump into
They're,
things.
they're
we're not
more
thinking.
casual. We haven't done these. You're new to running the historic preservation meetings.
Yeah, but I'm used to the planning commission. That's what we do.
I know,
So
I know, but
that's
it's
not
still,
me.
it's a whole different.
the, but we typically make this statement. Now I will say the Historic Preservation Commission can make its own rule. We have the student commissioner always read the disclosures. Brian, would you be open to, you don't have
Pass
to.
that down.
There's actually,
That's this one, right?
Brian, I'll tell you what, I'll read it the first time if you'll read it on the next one.
Okay.
Okay. And then
We've got to read it for each.
right. And so this is, so we're gonna take a step back because we haven't started deliberation or even public comments at this point, but you are in a decision-making role. So, I mean, everyone's in a very good mood and everyone's being very friendly here. Doug is here as the applicant, but it is his project and you are determining whether to say yes to it or whether to say no to it. So while it's okay, but that is still your authority and you can have questions, you can condition things, you can require things of these projects. So related to the disclosures that are related to conflicts of interest, bias, ex parte communication, those are the things that disclosure is about. So ORS 197.797 requires certain statements be made at the commencement of a public hearing, specifically quasi-judicial public hearings. The applicable city and state zoning criteria must be listed. This means that we must advise you of the standards that must be satisfied by the applicant prior to our approval or denial of an application. The planning staff will list the applicable criteria during his or her presentation of the staff report. Persons wishing to participate in this hearing must direct their testimony or the evidence toward the criteria stated by the planner or other specific city or state criteria which you believe apply. You must tell us why the testimony or evidence relates to the criteria. Any issue which might be raised in an appeal of this case to the Land Use Board of Appeals, or LUBA, must be raised in person or by the letter at the local level prior to the city approving or denying the application. The law states that the issue must be raised in enough detail to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond. This part of the law is known as the raise it or waive it requirement. If you do not bring it up now, you can't bring it up at LUBA. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval in enough detail to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Prior to the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing on the application, a participant may request, there's a typo, may request an opportunity to present additional evidence or testimony regarding the application. The Planning Commission, in this case, the Historic Preservation Commission, will grant such a request through a continuance or extension of the record. So with respect to bias, ex parte, and conflicts of interest. So bias is you have familiarity with it and you could have a bias. If you are biased, you can abstain yourself. If you could have a bias, but you won't let it influence your decision-making, you should disclose that to your colleagues here today because they're doing the decision-making too. And then, and to anyone else at the hearing, if you have an actual conflict of interest, that is something typically where you have a fiduciary connection or a family member or someone who lives in your household has a fiduciary connection where the approval or denial could result in the enrichment of yourself or another person related to you. That's a conflict of interest. Other things that you just kind of like know people, that's not necessarily conflict of interest. And then the last would be ex parte communication. Do you live near the site? Have you walked by it? Well, I should say, ex parte communication is primarily, do you have information that your colleagues may not? So if you went by the site, even if you just kind of did, but you think others may not have, you could disclose that. That would be a more limited one. If you actually talk to the applicant or someone like that about this outside of this hearing, you will want to disclose that because you want to make sure everyone at this table gets in the same footing as you are for making decisions. So with that in mind, does anyone have any disclosures they'd like to make related to bias, conflict of interest, or ex parte communication?
Wow.
Not that I.
Well, and so, and help clarify, because this is a new role for me
Sure.
in doing this. My wife walked by the site earlier today and was like, oh yeah, here's a picture of the house they're talking about. And you know, it's raised up already on piers ready to be moved.
That's it. That's a perfectly reasonable disclosure because you saw something that's not in my slides and that you just want to make sure like, hey, this was shared with me, it was done casually. But if you can also say, I saw this, it's not going to influence it doesn't change things.
It doesn't change it. Just like she walked by the site they're moving it to and saw that it had been cleared. It doesn't change or bias my opinion, just gives me information.
So I don't have any more information on it, but I have walked by it multiple times in the process of it getting lifted, and I have taken pictures because I'm doing my own side thing with history. So I heard from somebody, it's a rumor that this building has been moved before, but besides it possibly being moved before and something else and the pictures I've taken, that's all.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, drove by the construction site of the current building at the Fox location today and was super surprised to see it up on blocks, but.
And know that I talked to Clay about it before we did it. I said, on my dime, I'm trying to stay ahead of George Fox, you know, anticipating. So we did discuss it before I had it lifted, so it's been discussed.
Yeah.
And those blocks do not change your decision ability, just so we're clear.
Can I ask a question? Are you representing George Fox or?
No, I'm representing myself.
Okay.
Yeah, as
That's
Premier Trust, yeah.
You approached George Fox and said, I would like to buy this and move it. Is that correct?
Yeah, you are correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do we have any concerns at all about the planning zoning issue that it's currently institutional? It will be commercial. I don't know anything about what's in the rules, so I'm just wondering if that's an issue.
It's usually the zoning is the use, what you can do. It sometimes is the building as well.
Okay.
There are many other buildings that look relatively similar along that area that are a single family home type structure,
right,
but they're used for a commercial use.
Right.
So this would be very aligned with what's already there and what's allowed in that use.
I would also throw out, maybe this is another disclosure. It used to be the security building at George Fox.
Okay.
It closed, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago as a security building, but it was operating, yes, in the institutional zoning, but it had a very commercial use to it, if you will. So it's not a huge transition for the building itself.
And in our pre-app that was discussed, it will not be residential.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, it's a building that will be commercial in its use, even if structurally it's a residence or has historically been a residence.
As the house next door is Old Country Realty. And
Yeah.
that's, same idea, that zoning.
Yeah.
And as I said, you know, I don't anticipate a LUBA appeal on this. You know, I don't see where this is a real contentious one. But if just thinking down the line, if we get to that point, what is the appropriate time for an applicant to jump in and like here?
Yeah,
It totally makes
So-
sense for you
so
to jump in.
Typically, so we've gone fairly far off script. Okay. So typically how the sequence would go, and this is what I meant that there's kind of a cheat sheet for quasi judicial hearings, is the sequence of events is typically staff presentation of the item, clarifying questions from the decision-making body. The lead proponent gets an opportunity to make a public comment. That's typically the applicant and so they get a longer period of time than a typical public commenter. Then if there are more than one, typically if there's kind of a designated lead opponent, they get to go next. And they get to also have a longer period of time than most of the public commenters. Then we go through all of the remaining people with public comments, usually with a designated time frame. So usually you give them 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. And if that sounds short, anyone talking for 3 minutes straight, you can cover a lot of ground if you don't stop. So it's up to the chair to determine how long that period should be. It's often based on the number of public commenters you have. So if you want to make it longer because you only got 1 or 2, no big deal. If you've got 12 people in the room, you give them each 5 minutes, you're going to be here quite a while. And then after that, after all those public comments are made, that lead proponent, the applicant, gets to make a rebuttal. So they actually get to have the last public comment because it gives them an opportunity to respond to all the things that your body has just heard. Then at that point, you would close the public hearing. And that means that there's no more conversation with the applicant or with the public at that point. And you enter deliberation. Usually at that time, you ask staff, because staff during their presentation will typically give you what the recommendation from staff is. And then you will often ask again, what is the recommendations from staff? Has it changed? Typically, it has not changed. It's possible that it could change depending on what we hear at that public hearing, right? And then you go into deliberation. After the initial staff presentation, you have the ability to ask clarifying questions, but you shouldn't really be having a conversation amongst yourselves while talking with staff. That's supposed to happen once the public hearing is closed. And once you go into that, then you can have the conversation amongst yourselves and you can engage staff in that conversation as you want or need to. It depends on the staff member, how much they'll get involved, but typically it's your conversation to be had. Staff will inject into that conversation if we hear you going into some place that like, it's not a decision you can make, or that's not criteria you're allowed to use in this type of a decision-making process. So in the disclosure that I read, that's about the ORS statutes and those sorts of things, one of the things it mentioned was some of the criteria that will be used for evaluation. So that criteria for evaluation is important because that is what your decision is also supposed to be made on. And it's why we'll be reviewing these once we get through the description of the project, which is actually the very next slide. We'll be going through some of the criteria that were evaluated and that are also a big chunky part of the staff report that was sent to you. I don't know if this has been, I don't know what kind of orientation the Historic Preservation Commissioners have each gotten over time because I think some people came on at different times. I don't know who onboarded everyone, but for this sort of a role, what I tell people is if you read nothing else in the giant packet that you're given, all the attachments and stuff, read the staff report. It's usually broken into, for quasi-judicial items, 3 major sections. One is a description of the application. It's usually the location, what the applicant says they're doing, characteristics, some site maps and those sorts of things, maybe some photos. And then it'll maybe have a short analysis that might be key terms. It might be zoning district information. It might be kind of special use criteria and talk about some of those things. And it sets up going into the next section, which are your findings. And so those are the applicable criteria. And one at a time, staff goes through those and responds and says, this is the criteria. This is the response to that. This is whether or not it's met. And those are usually wrapped up with the criterion is met, the criterion is not met, or something like the aforementioned criterion will be met, or the criterion will be met if the aforementioned conditions of approval are adhered to. And what that means is it didn't meet the criteria, but it will if they do this thing or these things. And so those are usually the way that we wrap those up. And typically the way that we draft those is there's might be a little information about what's in the project, what's in the rules, and then some hopefully rational statement that ties those together and says, because the project is proposing to do this, this criteria is met in this way. But it shouldn't be a circular argument. It should be something that is rational and says, because X plus B, therefore it will equal C, or something like that. So you should see something, and if that logic doesn't appear to be there, or it appears to be circular or false, you should tell us. But sometimes it is hard to write those sorts of findings for things that are really obvious and simple. So sometimes we will say it's just not applicable. And so we haven't done a full finding because statement, which is not applicable. But you're always welcome to question those. So those will be the findings. We do get conditions in those. So if something's not being met, we'll say because, you know, this thing is not doing this, this thing is being required. That should be proportional and it should mirror the code or the criteria that's supposed to be met. So it should fix the problem. It's not supposed to require them to do things that don't fix the problem because that's not reasonable and it's not related to the criteria. And then once you get through the findings, the next thing you'll have is your conditions of approval. Those conditions of approval are just a list of all those conditions that came out of the findings. So they should be the exact same. Part of the reason they should be the same is if they're different, then you don't know which ones you're supposed to follow. That's for the applicant, that's for the jurisdiction, that's for everybody. So it's supposed to be the same. So there might be some side notes, like we'll put in what we call development notes, and that might tell you in the conditions of approval who you go talk to about your building permits, talking to Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue if there's something related to that in those. But those things can be in there too, so they might have some extras in there, but they shouldn't be giving additional conditions at that point because that ship has sailed. It's supposed to do that. With that, does anyone have questions about your quasi-judicial role?
Slight question. I've presented for other historic review boards, and our decision-making process is should just be based on, does this project meet the criteria that it has to meet? I mean, it's not
supposed to be your feelings.
Right. Okay. Just want to clarify that. So we're pretty tight. If this meets things, we have to approve it. Okay.
That's right. Now, the whole point of why it's going to Historic Preservation Commission is because there is some subjectivity on whether or not it meets it. So we're asking residents in their decision and discretionary thinking, does it meet those things? If so, how does it meet it? How does it not meet it? And the other thing that you can do at times is you could, if you don't think it's meeting something, you can add a condition. But you need to tie it to a criteria. You can't do that arbitrarily. What we want to avoid is something that is arbitrary and capricious. So we'll tie in arbitrary and capricious and be the opposite. I'm not sure what the opposite is exactly, but you want to be the opposite of it. You want to be deliberative. And one of the things we talk about is things need to be proportional. So your decisions, what we require of people, they need to be proportional. And so there's a reasonability associated with that.
That's a helpful bringing us up to speed. I appreciate your patience with us. Like I said,
And I'm sorry we got out of order.
No, that's okay. But most of us are new, and combined with, we haven't done a lot of these.
Sure.
And, you know, and I'm the chair. And so I'm going to try in these early ones to try and thread a needle, and I'll take everybody's input as we go along, how I'm doing. I want to make it as easy and accessible and comfortable for folks. I would love for the reputation to be that the Historic Preservation Commission is great to work with and is doing a good job of promoting history and letting folks develop their properties. But I don't want to get us too casual where, you know, we've had a conversation that there's nothing that feels over the line or out of place, but there might be meetings where it's not appropriate for us to have that same give and take. So
yeah, you guys invited me to the table tonight, but that might not always be the case.
Yeah. But I also don't want to be like, well, if we don't invite somebody to the table, they know their application's in trouble.
You can make a policy that we're going to invite you to the table, but you need to wait your turn and kind of set rules at the front when you say you're invited, but we need you to stick with the procedure.
And that's kind of where I'm leaning. I want folks to literally, physically, and, you know, work-wise be at the table with us. And like I said, this isn't one where I'm anticipating a big to-do over it. So it's more casual, but I want us to be prepared for the ones where there is more at stake.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go to the virtual setting for a moment. Melissa, will you, actually, James, if you're watching, I don't have everything up, but if James, I'm assuming you're watching, and do you have anything to add for these guys in terms of quasi-judicial role that are new that you think I might have skipped that you think might be valuable for them to think about?
Nope, I think you covered it pretty well.
He fell asleep.
Yeah,
I must have covered it pretty well if I put it asleep.
he's madly scrambling.
Well, he's probably there. I
It's
mean, I
mute
probably
button.
caught him mid-dinner.
And yeah,
Well, let's see if we can hear him now.
Nope, think that covered it.
I may reach out to James anyway towards the end of the presentation too, because frankly, he took this for most of the time that it's been in application and helped set up most of the staff report stuff too.
Oh,
All right.
can't hear him.
Oh, is he speaking? We just can't hear him.
I think he was at one point. He's on. He did unmute for a minute. I'm gonna try to see.
Which seems like it's working because I can hear it.
Uh-huh.
There's a mic button.
I know.
Right
Did you see
there.
someone misspelled Mike on there?
Oh.
Oh, sorry, you meant the button. It's
No.
yeah, it's not. Good. So you mean
He
is there?
is chatting. So I think covered my mic not work. I think that covered it.
Okay.
Is my mic not working? I can hear you all.
Okay. Well, at least we know he can hear us.
Working.
So we'll get back to him. He can send anything through the chat that he wants if he's got anything to add. But does anyone else have any other questions before we continue?
I do.
Go ahead, Deb.
So do you have the specific criteria that we're supposed to kind of evaluate tonight?
I do. Those are the next slides.
Excellent.
And I'm going to go and I highlighted them on the second or third slide. When we went in, I said applicable criteria and said purpose,
Yep.
planning commission review, and those. So those are what I'm going to be taking us through. So
Okay.
that's why I mentioned those. And then we're going to get into them a little more detail on the very next slide.
Great.
So on the very next slide, after my second relocation map, I'm sure there was a reason why I put it in there, but I can't remember what it was. So one of the first things we did is the why. Why are we bringing this up for something that's a moving review? So we're doing it because it says so, basically. So this section kind of discusses when the Historic Preservation Commission is required to conduct reviews. So you all have the text in front of you, but because we don't have the same, actually, you're showing the presentation virtual, aren't you?
I am.
Okay. I think everybody's got a hard copy in front of them that's in the room.
Right.
So I'm not going to read exactly what the slide says, but because this proposed project includes moving a designated historic landmark that's already identified in the historic resources inventory, it should be reviewed and decided by the historic preservation procedures. And that comes out of NMC 15.344.030C2. So that's a place in our municipal code, and that's where this citation that's shown on the screen comes from. So, and one of the things I wanted to highlight is there's another section that precedes this that talks about the Historic Preservation Commission being given the duties and authorities of the Planning Commission. And so what that means is this quasi-judicial role in approving or not approving something. But your role is specific to this portion of the development code related to historic resources. The Planning Commission tends to oversee lots of other land use type actions, what you can do, where you can do it, how much you can do it. So this particular criteria, or really this requirement that we follow a procedure, will be met through this hearing. So it's not something that the applicant meets, it's something we meet procedurally. So then we go on to the next slide. And this one, frankly, is really a cheater slide if you're looking at it, because you can just go to the next slide and it highlights what I consider the important stuff. So this one is another citation. It's from that 15.344.030C2 and 3. And so this one basically talks about those alternatives, what we need to look through, what we're required to do specific to demolition permits and moving reviews are both mentioned. And one of the things that's mentioned here on the subsection 2, or subsection C2, I should say, is the process. It talks about the process and public notice for review of a demolition permit shall be conducted under a type 3 procedure. So why is that important since we're not talking about a demolition? Is because that was initially introduced as what the university wanted to do with this landmark. And so what we're looking at is the alternative to demolition, which is the moving review. And so the intent that the Historic Preservation Commission meet and applicants seek alternatives such as sale, salvage, relocation, or donation of it to historic or interested groups, not simply to delay the demolition.
So does that mean that Fox didn't even apply to demolish this process of sale and moving?
That's correct. So we didn't get a demolition permit, but We're also not, no, we didn't get an application for one, so we didn't have to engage in that. It was just through conversations with staff. And so when this application came in, we're still, because those conversations were engaged with,
Right.
or engaged in, considering this, that they identified an alternative and sought it.
Right, okay.
So for staff purposes now, if your commission chooses to disagree with that, that is your prerogative, but that was the interpretation that we've taken on this particular one. Subsection 3 here also talks about something. So it talks about consider the purpose of this chapter is stated in 15344.010. So that is the purpose statement. So that's a purpose statement that we have in here in the, let's see, I believe that's listed in the staff report, but I didn't reiterate it here in the slides because it seems somewhat redundant with some of the other things that we were doing. But the purpose for historic resources, for the most part, is the preservation of important landmarks and cultural assets. And that's a very shorthand version of what the purpose says, but that's the intent. So going on to the next slide, this is 15344.020D, relating to landmark designation and designation criteria. So this was referenced in one of those preceding slides and what we need to look at when we think about these. So we're supposed to look at the designation criteria to ask, will these be kept? Will these be maintained in some capacity when we move forward? And so it says here, if the building, structure, site, or object is currently listed in the National Register of Historic Places of the United States of America, property or properties shall be designated as a local landmark. In addition, landmarks shall include those buildings, structures, sites, or objects which have been identified as landmarks in the historic resources element of the comprehensive plan. Following criteria will be used in the Historic Preservation Commission and City Council in considering other properties. So this one continues on the next slide. But where it mentions the comprehensive plan, I wanted to mention that so we have a comprehensive plan. It's a high-level land use document. That's what cities use to meet the statewide land use planning goals that Oregon has. So that's fairly unique to Oregon, the land use planning program we have here. And the goals and policies that we have in our comprehensive plan are meant to meet those things that are required at the state level. And then they set where the goals and policies or kind of the decision-making framework for implementation. And we do that through the municipal code. And so that's why we're using, instead of referencing the comprehensive plan, we're referencing our historic resources inventory. And we're referencing the municipal code, which kind of lays out the rules. Okay, so on that next slide, we go into those designation criteria, some of those that were evaluated. And so some of these, I wanted to highlight these on the slide and just kind of note that kind of the historic resource profile for this landmark, what it says is important about it. And that's kind of what goes back to these designation criteria that the building, and this is out of its statement of significance. That the building is significant for establishing the historic character of the area and maintaining integrity of design and materials. So it also goes back to some of the other things we talked about, the type of resource it is. It's a secondary resource. It's part of the Nob Hill area. And so those are some of the general statements of significance. What we'll see in this encounter to the other project that we'll be looking at tonight is it has a lot to do with the era. It has a lot to do with the identity of Newburgh. It has a little less to do with kind of architectural design and craftsmanship. That's not really what's discussed in the survey form that we see when we look at the inventory. That doesn't mean it's not important that there aren't stylistic components of value and merit that are associated with it because they are there as well. And then also, because the applicant indicated in the application materials that exterior portions of the structure are not going to be affected as a result of the relocation, and that there's a desire to retain the historic landmark designation status of the structure. So it's felt that the structure's historic significance with respect to design and materials will be maintained despite relocation. And so even though it was not designated because of those things, it still possesses some of those qualities, and those qualities will be maintained. So those are some of the things that we kind of looked at through the evaluation of this. The other designation ones are on the next slide. And so that the proposed landmark will serve the purpose found in section 15344.010, and that the economic, social, environmental, and energy. I'm not sure that energy is the right word. That
I was going to ask you, what were we talking like electrical
I'm
energy
gonna,
or
if you all
emotional energy of the town? Well, no, because that's a word. No, but that's a word that I would use.
I mean, it is. That would seem very progressive for our historic resources code. Let me take a look.
Yes.
02344.020D. And if James beats me to it and puts it in the chat, that's acceptable because he's probably already started looking. I wouldn't put it past him. B and C, 2, 3. No, it does say energy. It says the economic, social, environmental, and energy consequences of conflicting uses shall be considered. I have no idea.
Does that make sense? I mean, if it's being moved, even if it's being adapted, there are energy consequences, whether or not that's dealing with new electrical hookups, new gas hookups, new infrastructure in general. That's an infrastructure issue. How is city infrastructure going to be impacted by this project? I would almost
Energy is
see that.
referred to as effort.
Really interesting.
I'm not even,
Okay.
I suppose so. So do you think it makes sense for the word energy to be in there? Just in general? I mean,
I would have
don't
picked a
disagree.
different word. I associate it as an effort
Yeah.
more than I did the PGE bill I get every month.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I
Well-
was taking, that's what, when I said emotional was the best word I could come up with, but I was kind of thinking more of the impact on the community, you know, the
Well,
vibe of.
with that in mind,
Yeah.
between effort and vibe, that those might both.
How much effort are you gonna put into the vibe?
Yeah.
So those are, let me go back to the slide. So our evaluation of some of these things, we felt that these weren't going to be impacted. So there wasn't a significant or kind of detrimental economic, social, environmental. We must have just skipped completely past energy because it didn't make sense to me. But in none of the contexts that I can think of for energy does it become something that seems consequential or conflicting. I do have written in here in my notes the purpose statement, and since we haven't actually said that, and it wasn't in the slides, I think this is why I didn't put it earlier. So I wanted to tie back to it a criteria too that's listed on this slide. So that purpose statement, or 15344.010, says the purpose of the historic overlay zone is to A, safeguard the historic landmarks, buildings, and sites representing significant elements of Newburgh history. B, promote the historic, educational, cultural, economic, and general welfare of the public through the preservation, restoration, and protection of these buildings, structures, sites, and objects of historic interest within the city. C, foster civic pride in the accomplishments of the past. And D, protect and enhance the city's attractions to tourists and visitors.
Is
So
there currently a plaque on the house that designates?
And we talked about that, there isn't, but there sure can be.
Yeah.
And if you want to run tours, things like that, it's.
and the applicant, Doug,
Yeah.
he did express that there's an interest in putting up signage, kind of
Right.
noting the historic status
That's awesome.
of it at a later time. But it doesn't have one right now.
Thank you.
And that's the last of the informational slides that I have. So the staff's recommendation was that the commission moved to adopt Historic Preservation Commission Order 2024-002, which approves the requested moving review. And one last note on this too is that we received no public comments, and the agency comments that we did receive are in the packet too. And I don't think any of them had any significant concern with this, other than obtaining appropriate moving permits to move along roads and route. So with that, happy to answer any questions. And that can be about procedure and process, or it can be about the project.
Procedural question. Okay, so you've completed the presentation,
That's correct.
and then is that the point where the applicant would speak to their?
That's right. So this would be the opportunity for the commission to ask staff clarifying questions about what they just heard. They're not supposed to ask leading questions involving deliberation and decision-making. It's supposed to be clarifying questions, which sometimes is a little hard to parse from like the deliberative questions. But for the most part, ask about things that you've heard in the presentation, clarification, maybe a little deeper, something if needed, and those sorts of things. And some of those happen during this particular one. But you can ask those. And then when you're satisfied with those, move on. It will be the applicant's turn.
Okay.
So, and I will say that it's relatively common for applicants. Some applicants bring presentation materials, but it's also very common for us to get applicants who come in and say, I don't really have any materials. Staff just presented it, and I'm here to answer your questions. Or sometimes they'll give you a little bit more about the why they're doing it and why it's of interest to them. But it's often it's typically far less formalized than staff.
And yeah, so does anybody have any clarifying questions for? Okay. And then applicant, does anybody have any questions, or let give you a moment if you wanted to just say anything briefly?
Yeah, and I think we're pretty much covered. Yeah, it was a discussion with George Fox. Can I save the house? And how far do I have to move it? And is it feasible? And it was close enough. I had the piece of property. It made sense, but if you had to move it much further, it wouldn't make much sense. So, but yeah, we're locked and loaded, so I sure hope you guys think it's a good idea. In deep.
Any clarifying
Yeah.
questions for, I'm sorry,
Anything,
Doug is your name?
Yeah, Doug.
Doug.
Yeah,
Okay, thanks.
yeah. If you guys have any questions?
I move that we adopt the commissions. Can I
We have
do
to
that?
close the public hearing
Oh,
first.
Yeah.
so sorry.
So move it into deliberation. So it's a roundtable. It's hard to make it feel official, which is kind of a good thing.
If there was an opponent, we would give an opponent a
give
chance
those.
to speak at this
Yep.
point. There isn't, so then,
Any other public comments, and there aren't any of those either.
and to close it, so do I declare close? Okay, so
You say I'm closing the public
I'm
hearing,
closing the public hearing,
and now you deliberate.
and now we can deliberate.
I have no further deliberation, but I would like to move that we adopt the commission's proposal that we, how do I say this here? That we move to adopt the historic preservation order 2402, which approves the requested moving review as presented here tonight.
I second that.
Got a motion and a second?
Third that.
You know, we only need to go second, and then we just do a vote by name.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's
Okay.
right. I have to do name this time.
So she'll do a roll call.
Alrighty. Charles Watson.
Approved.
Britta Mansfield.
Approved.
Bob Woodruff.
Approved.
Deborah.
Approved, obviously.
And Brad Ingstrom.
Approved, sorry.
Passes unanimously.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. It was fun to work with you. It's save a house.
Yeah.
Yeah, now, and one thing we'll need to be careful of is not to telegraph ourselves when we're deliberate, because it's like, yeah, you've got this guy sitting here and he wants an answer, and I wanted to tell him when he first walked in, I think this is a great idea.
Right.
But a question that I have for you is, so how did the connection, for historic preservation, how did the connection between you and George Fox happen?
I literally saw the house. I was walking by and I live in the area, and we got the application for their new art center, and then just the light bulb went on. What am I gonna do with the house?
Okay.
And I just had the piece, and it just worked out. They offered me another house on, can't think of the street, and I just didn't have a piece of property that, or else I'd grab that, but it was not historical.
And so are you in real estate development? Or what's your?
We do a little bit of investing and flipping and a little,
Excellent. So. Yeah, because I mean, sounds like this was just fortuitous, but any ways we could think, this is something for us to think of, is how to foster those sorts of connections. You know, I don't know what that would mean exactly, but the only hesitancy that I would have had with this would be potentially for the future. This end of town, kind of south of 2nd Street, has a lot of smaller houses, and the house was an historic landmark. The house that you took down was a smaller scale house. This is a little bit bigger scale. And so those smaller ones are harder to develop. And, you know, they're going to be easy for those to go away. So thinking about how to preserve those. And again, it doesn't happen here, but I wouldn't want to have like houses that were on the edge of town get moved into the center so that folks can develop bigger lots outside of town. And we get kind of a false sense of how compact the historic area was, but none of those came into play here. It was just what I thought about when I thought about moving a house.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
This is awesome. Thank you for
thank you guys, and let's work together. And
thank you for doing this.
So, happy to.
Off the record,
Yeah.
as another applicant, you have a partition?
Do we have, no, we don't have a partition
It's already
yet. We did our
locked?
pre-app, and
Cool.
everything's working out, and we're gonna park it there, and it's gonna take about 3 months, I would imagine, to
Sewer, water, it's already there?
it's all there. Yeah, we're gonna start everything.
That's awesome.
foundation guy wants the
So
house
much
on
easier.
site, he's gonna drop a plumb line and do the
Yeah.
foundation after the fact.
The only way to do it.
Yeah,
You
so,
can't move it. You tear the foundation up trying.
yeah, or if you have the house off by 3 inches or something, you're gonna be in trouble, so.
Cool.
Yeah, they want to build it on site, so.
Yeah.
Have you moved a house before?
I have not moved a house before, yeah. I've restored a lot of houses around here.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact, the one that, George Fox, president lives in, the one up on College.
Yeah.
I did that one, so, so I've done a lot of houses, so.
Like, I live on Dayton Avenue right here, so about a couple houses down.
Yeah.
So this is my neighborhood, so it's nice to see
Great.
Yeah.
something get torn down, but replaced with historic rather than
Yeah.
a new.
Yeah, in our case, nothing got torn down, it's just an extra lot. So,
Wasn't there a little house there?
no, there was
The next
never,
lot over.
yeah, it's the next lot over.
Okay, I haven't walked by it.
Yeah,
Oh, that's even better.
yeah, yeah, no,
Okay.
we haven't.
I was picturing it was that little
Yeah.
tiny one kind of tucked in.
Yeah,
Okay.
again, if you guys drive by,
I'll walk by. and-
you'll see it now, it's gonna
Oh,
make
yeah.
a lot of sense,
Nice.
but it's all cleared off.
Maybe I'll say that.
So, all right,
Well,
yeah, thank you guys.
Good job.
Yeah, thank you, we'll,
I don't know if, from my experience, there's not a permit necessary to knock a building down. So it could.
If it's not a historic designated.
It doesn't matter if it's historic or not.
Is
I
the,
don't
Well-
believe state,
It should though.
Yeah,
national, but I don't think the state requires to get a building permit.
the state doesn't, our local code requires for historic landmarks
Nice.
you do.
Yeah.
yeah.
But
Good.
that presumes everyone knows, which is one of the
Right.
problems. And so if it doesn't come up, or if someone doesn't come talk to us, doesn't know. So it is a real hazard with that.
yeah, that's all.
Yeah.
Well,
Great flat.
So-
I mean, it's awesome that you saw that, cause I don't know if we're awesome.
Yeah, it's very fortuitous. I think that's very.
Yeah, it was just a fluky thing and it was like, let's find out. Got a tape measure out, walked over the lot, like, you gotta be kidding me.
That's awesome.
So,
It might, and now it does.
and that, well, we'll see.
do you have a plan? What are you gonna do with the house once?
I
it's
don't, we did a lot of discussion.
Yeah. Cause you could
We
go.
don't need another
commercial,
coffee shop, we
residential,
don't need
Yeah.
a bookstore, I don't
Yeah.
know, but I think something will come up, so,
Oh, it'll fill.
yeah, it'll fill.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's an attorney or whether it's a, somebody.
Third spaces, there's still a need for third spaces in Newburgh.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure, yeah, but yeah, if you guys have ideas, let me know, if
Yeah.
I'm open to ideas, so thank you guys very much.
Well, thank you, Doug.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
Continue.
You have a good evening.
Yeah, thanks.
My 17-year-old daughter would say a vinyl record shop.
Oh.
Oh.
I'm glad I did.
Vinyl.
No,
It'll be an
it's,
interesting move. It'll be an
Yeah.
easy one.
Uh-huh.
I think so. I mean, they're really only moving a few blocks.
Oh, we've done a lot bigger ones.
All right.
Lot. So.
So this next one is also a quasi judicial hearing. So there's the testimony and evidentiary requirements reading. Brian, would you like to do it? Thank you, Commissioner.
Oh,
That
oh,
Brian, not
that
Brian.
Brian. We already read these.
So all 1, 2, 5.
Yeah, start at the top where it says RS and you got to read the whole thing. So we have to do this for each quasi judicial item is its own public hearing. So this is the start of another public hearing
this is one of those, it's a legal requirement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that we almost walked past, but no, we're not.
Did it.
ORS 197.797 requires certain statements be made at the commencement of a public hearing. The applicable city and state zoning criteria must be listed. This means that we must advise you of the standards that must be satisfied by the applicant prior to our approval or denial of an application. The planning staff, which would be the commission staff, correct? Or does
It would
that,
still be planning stuff
Okay.
in this
the
case.
planning staff would list the applicable criteria during his or her presentation of the staff report. Persons wishing to participate in this hearing must direct their testimony or the evidence toward the criteria stated by the planner or other specific city or state criteria which you believe apply. You must tell us why the testimony or evidence relates to the criteria. Any issue which might be raised in an appeal of this case to the Land Use Boards of Appeals, LUBA, must be raised in person or by letter at the local level prior to the city approving or denying the application. law states that the issue must be raised in enough detail to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond. This part of the law is known as the raise it or waive it requirement. If you not bring it up now, you cannot bring it up at LUBA. You cannot bring it up at LUBA, sorry. The failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval in enough detail to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes, an action for damages in circuit court prior to the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing or an application. Any participant may request a opportunity to present additional evidence or testimony regarding the application. The Planning Commission will grant us such a request through a conditional, oh my goodness, or continuance, thank you, or extension of the record.
Perfect. Thank you
Good
very
job.
much. And we're doing.
We made you read it cold with a lot of like legalese in it.
Right.
These are not
I know.
words that any of us say on a
I
regular
know,
basis.
they're not. So very, very well done.
Thank you.
Under
The-
pressure.
So
Good job.
but I would say a friendly crowd, so that's always a plus
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
So with that, we're gonna, we'll go ahead and start this. And this one, the city is both the applicant and the reviewer. So we wanted to disclose that. So that was, and that's, some of that is written into, I don't remember if it's the application materials or the staff report. But one of the things that's been in the past, we've had the planning division review materials from other departments. And it seems kind of like a false dichotomy because we really work for the same organization. It's not like we have different employers. So, and also the idea that, that the planning staff can't or shouldn't help staff in the organization prepare the documentation, but then would also kind of write up. So all of this was written, both the application materials that are directly attached and the evaluation and the staff report, those all came from jointly both Public Works and the Community Development Department. So Brian is the lead for the Public Works Department and for this, specifically for this project.
Yeah,
Is there
so
anything you want to say
it's-
about?
Yeah, it's
you,
hard because
Public Works?
I'm in the doer department and he's in the jump through the hoops department.
That would be one interpretation.
That's one way to work it.
No, so it's interesting to me because I didn't realize we would have had to do it. So it's been a good learning curve.
Yeah, and so, and
To go through the process.
one of the things to think about when he says doer and hooper, if you've ever heard anyone talk about the development pipeline, there's kind of like someone starts with an idea way over here. We would call that like concept or even pre-concept. And one of the first folks they have to talk to early in that concept development is planning on what you can do, where you can do it, how much you can do it. So those are the hoops. Those are the hoops you have to do through are what you can do, where you can do it, how, and sometimes how you have to do it. But then after that gets approved, it goes to often Public Works because it's all the ways that it gets public services delivered to the property. And then it goes to construction, which is off the building department, which is how you do something from a safety and hygiene perspective. In this case, there's another role that Public Works is fulfilling, and that is stewarding public facilities as well as public infrastructure. And so that's City Hall. And so as we go.
The cool part is too, is that like, just because we're part of the city and he's part of the city and we're doing it for the city, we try to treat our other departments as regular public people, as a developer, as a contractor, whatever. We have to, so I have to jump through the same hoops as you would if you were doing the same project or anybody else. It makes it transparent, makes it fair, which is good.
What we don't want is someone accusing the city of not following its own rules. So that's the whole purpose of this. But at the same time, there's kind of, we were trying to find new processes because it hasn't always worked this way in the past, to acknowledge that I don't work for a different organization. I work for the same people that Brian does. And frankly, I work with Brian where when something comes up, we talk to each other on a regular basis about stuff. So in this particular application, we're looking at City Hall. So I think all of you know that there was an ice storm back in January that significantly damaged the building. So most of the damage was interior, but there were some impacts to exterior portions of the building. And additionally, it's not very normal that the building is completely empty. So it's a good time to consider exterior alterations. In large part, I would say that some of them are to deal with damage. Some of it is not from the flood. Some of it is just chronic damage from it being an old building. That it's wear and tear, aging, and weathering. And then also to have it perform better as a building. And buildings can perform better or worse. Their heating and cooling, how much leak they're getting, how much that weathering and decay that's happening in the buildings, how quickly or slowly that's happening, and those sorts of things. And then also safety. And safety is a part of building performance because you want the building to be safe. So we're going to talk about some of those things in this presentation too. So when you look at the slides, there's the cover slide, that's the kind of the starting point, and then there's kind of the background slide that lists the owner, that's the city. What we're doing today is we're talking about the modification for exterior portions of City Hall, mostly with a focus on doors, windows, gutters, and crown. When we say crown, the Historic Resource Survey says modillion, which is not a term I'd ever heard before because I have not studied architecture, but we will typically refer to it as crown. You'll see that kind of parenthetically talked about. I try to do that because that seems to be one of the key features associated with the building and one of those special architectural features. So that's why that's kind of emphasized multiple times. The applicable criteria that we evaluated here were generally the chapter 15.344 for historic landmark subdistrict, the 344.015 historic preservation commission review, 15.344050 alteration, new construction, demolitions, but also the municipal codes chapter 15.350 civic corridor overlay subdistrict and the development standards for that, which are in 15.350.060. So the civic corridor overlay is a little bit special. That's not something that you all would normally review if that was the only thing we were looking at, but it comes along with this and there's no other planning nexus for these. So again, you guys are really functioning in your planning commission like role of approval, denial, quasi-judicial hearing. So that's where we are, which is why Brian gave us that nice reading for disclosures. Before we go further, does anyone have any bias, ex parte, or other disclosures they would like to make?
I don't know that this is relevant, but a family member, one of my sons, owns the property right next door to the city hall.
Will that cause any bias on his part?
No.
Okay, great.
I'll say on that kind of thing, I feel like it's always better to over disclose than under disclose.
And as staff, I would agree.
Yeah, you say that and you clarify that it's not going to impact your decision, but if, again, trying to think if we get into a contentious one and we deny somebody and it goes to LUBA, whether it gets in there or just his word in the community, oh, well, her son-in-law lives there. We don't want that.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Particularly in a small town. Yeah.
I've done history. I've done some research of my own and some different things like I do in the area of that building. That's another building I've done, but I don't have any bias. Just throwing that out there.
Okay. Anyone else?
I had nachos next door.
Probably had nachos anywhere. So.
Absolutely.
All right, so we're going to go into some of these next slides. And so these are just some kind of highlights. We're going to go through plans, site photos, and a few maps. So the location, it's right on the intersection of
First and Howard.
First and Howard, thank you. I always want to say Hancock. It's Howard. So
These slides say First Street and College though.
They do say college.
well, I didn't put that on there. So whatever layer we're using is labeled wrong because that is
It does say college, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does
Hey,
actually.
actually, that looks like college.
Do I have is that site map the wrong one?
Yes.
You can
Yeah,
ignore
yeah.
that location map on the
Yeah.
right. That is wrong. We'll see if the next one is correct.
Yes.
But I will
The
tell
way
you,
that
That's
my
not the
brain
right-
goes,
the-
it went straight to that, and I was
Yeah.
like, there is a big building there, but that's
No,
not
that's
that
not
building.
Good catch.
good eye
Catch.
up, Ariel. Thank you.
Looks super similar.
Well,
From.
they're all big
It's
flat
all of
square
them,
buildings.
So they all look the same from there.
Yep.
So the bottom left picture should be right on that slide. And then going down to the zoning map slide, that one is probably the same exact image. So those would also be the wrong ones, but it is in the C3 zone because it's in downtown and everything's in the C3 zone in
Same zone.
downtown. There are public utilities located in the streets surrounding it. So it is on city services. So there's stormwater, those sorts of things. This one, the only landscaping that we find around this subject property, because it basically goes right up to the sidewalk, are just street trees that are in tree wells. So even if you're ignoring the aerials, I can tell you that's what's there. There is a very small tree garden in the back corner towards the alley at the rear of the city hall. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move along past those since those are not correct. So what this project's proposing to include would be 35 window alterations, 2 door replacements, replacement of roof skirting and flashing, repair of portions of that decorative crown feature that was mentioned, and installation of 2 gutters and 2 downspouts. Is there anything else on just a general description? Okay. So we're looking at a couple of pictures next. I'm just looking at City Hall. If you live in this town and you're on this commission, I would be shocked if you don't know what City Hall looks like, because it's right on the main drag. If not, it's also very close, so it'd be easy to go find. But so those are just some of the features that we're looking at. But I would point out that all of these, you should be able to just think about what you're looking at. Is that decorative crown is that white band towards the top of the parapet. That's a parapet that's across the top. And the features under there, I mean, that articulation associated with that would be some of what makes it a modillion as an architectural feature. Also see some of the other aspects associated with the pilasters and some of the other kind of keystone and other arch and window features associated with this are all things that are mentioned in the historic resource survey, which is on the next slide. I mentioned some of the highlights associated with this. So this is from that profile, and I didn't have it with me in my notes before, but those resource survey forms were filled out between 1984 and 1985. So they do, like I said, they predate the 1990 inventory. So it's kind of a composite document. So the building was constructed in 1913 by George Howland. He was a local carpenter builder. It's considered a classical revival style. Buildings typical of public buildings that are built in that era, in the early 19th, 20th century. Site's notable for a rich concentration of historic structures. That's that civic corridor overlay. So that has to do with that kind of comment. It's highly visible in the commercial core along First Street, quite obviously. The brick for the building was supplied by Wilhelmina Brickyard Company, formerly in Newburgh. Wilhelmina. Sorry, I'm not from around here.
No problem. Okay.
And at that time, still owned and operated by local Jesse Edwards family. All right, so the next slides we get into, Brian, do you want to talk about these since they're the plans and what you think is kind of important as we look at
them?
I mean, you don't
have to, I mean, if you go by the building and you look at it, even some of these next slides, in 1999, the building was completely remodeled because of the fire. It was redone. A lot of the ones were replaced. There's 2 different styles that they reused. The windows we are going to replace are kind of a fake wood. They're supposed to be a double hung, but they don't have the weights. They have vinyl tracks and locks. Most of them don't function. So, or like on the 2nd and 3rd floor, some of them you can't even get open. So it's, like I said, it's empty. Now's the time to get rid of them. We're proposing to make them match the style of the rest of the ones with the black trim.
So one of the things with this is, so we looked at it and asked ourselves, are these things original period pieces that have been kind of maintained and kept along? And what we've looked at is based on that overhaul that was done in the 90s. No, they don't appear to be. It doesn't appear that any of them are. So partially the lack of things like those weights and things like that, that's how they would have been built.
The as built on the remodel dated 1999 show those windows all being replaced.
And so as you look at the next couple of slides that are on here, we look at it from the Highway 99 and First Street view. And it's just kind of marking up, and there are bigger versions of these in the materials that were circulated to all, that we tried to highlight where those changes are happening. So that's that kind of redlining process and the keynotes that are on the side. So those are in the staff report materials too. And so this is the north side of the building, or looking north. No, sorry. Looking south from the north side of the building. Thank you.
The First Street side of the building.
So, or the northern elevation, so the northern face.
So in that 992, they also added that building next to it. They connected them.
Right. So that's an addition that was done. And part of why it looks so different is they're trying not to make a caricature out of something that is historic. So if you think about, you don't want to turn your historic structure into a Disney attraction, right? So you don't want to make it try and get close, but not really be able to get close because you don't do craftsmanship the same way now. So you just use it, be contemporary, but matching. And that was some of the concept with the windows that are proposed for this and the other elements. So they're market windows, but we're trying to match the aluminum cast and the glazing or the layout pattern of those so they match some of what we're used to seeing with this landmark. So as we go to the next slide, it just shows it from the east elevation or east face. You didn't already know the oversized window that's on the right, which is already market glass. That used to be stables and where the carriages came out of from the fire department back in the day. So that's why we have that round to strangely tall window, because it wasn't always a window. And then the next one is looking at the rear of the building or the south elevation. We don't show a west elevation because it's flush with the next building. So now these other ones, Brian, this might be a good one for you in particular to kind of take them through what we're looking at here and what you think are some of the important features.
So the one, I mean, from the pictures, you can't tell the difference. But if you go up or go inside, you can, and if you get real close on the outside, but all these will be replaced. We have a manufacturer, each window will get measured. They're not going to be out of the box. Everyone's going to be precise, built for that opening.
So that's what we mean by glazing and layout.
Yeah. But oddly enough, the 99 windows are double pane too, which was another thing. They're not that old. So
So we're not losing period features associated with the structure because they already don't exist. And we think this will significantly help the building perform better. Some of it has to do with safety and security. So there's some large windows in the second stories that do open, that if some ding-a-ling staff member keeps it open and something gets knocked out or someone knocks something out of it, those sorts of things, they just wouldn't be built quite the same.
There's a handful of them that swelled up pretty good too with the flood. Yeah. I don't know how it's like IKEA furniture. You can't repair it.
Yeah, and I don't know the extent of which ones were flooded as well as others, but like we said, between the flood and that the building's empty, this seemed like the right time to do some of these things because some of these could be eligible for funds associated with the flood and insurance. Others, it's just a good time to do it if we can rustle up the funds to do something like this at a good time.
Yeah, that's above our pay grade to wrestle with the insurance.
That's right. Neither of us are involved in that, but we just know it's happening.
It does.
So the next slide kind of just highlights that crown feature. And so that's going to be a remove, repair, replace to the extent that we can. So one of the next couple of slides actually are the above angles, because from the street view, it looks great.
I'm surprised it's still hanging on and it hasn't fallen off.
So once you go through the one that kind of highlights the wraparound on that, you see the kind of almost tar paper looking stuff that looks somewhat eroded. The slide after that.
And it has no flashing.
Yeah.
So all that moisture just kind of stayed there.
Right. So that's some of the things why we want this to happen, because we don't want the decorative features compromising the integrity of the structure itself or kind of accelerating that deterioration. So that's what some of our maintenance folks have kind of, well, you're not.
No, but if
the maintenance folks have talked about,
it's just going to continue to rise. It's going inside the building structurally. Hasn't gotten there yet. So, and it will be replaced as it looks. It will, as close as we can get some. And we'll probably, I mean, I don't think you'll notice the difference, especially from the ground. It's going to get replaced as like.
Right. So we're doing everything we can to make sure it's as close a match as possible. And some of it has to do with and what we're looking at on this next slide that shows kind of up close boards and rock and maybe plaster, is those are the places where it's anchoring and deteriorating at the building. So that's what we're looking at, is some of those interior, hard to take interior pictures of the interior of the building, except when it's pulling away or when there's damage. So that's what we're worried about, is that it could be deteriorating from the inside and that it could be impacting the wall itself. So those are some of the reasons we want to do with this, but they want to be able to have those still go through, still support that structural feature and still display the same from the outside, but rebuild it in a way where it won't deteriorate the rest of the structure.
with proper flash.
Yeah, things like proper flashing.
Yes.
All right, so now we get into the application process and some of the criteria. So
Did you mean to go over gutters?
we can go back to the go back a couple of slides to show where they are in the red lines.
Okay, yeah,
Was that my
we
deal?
missed the gutters. There are no gutters on that building,
Well,
And
that would be why we don't have
and
pictures.
it is a flat roof. It's got a little bit of a slope.
I will
Not
ask
much.
kind of out of order, but where does the water go now? Like, how do you
It
manage
just-
that stormwater?
It just weeps off.
Okay.
Yeah. It just,
And then no flash.
and then no.
And no
flashing.
flashing.
So, yeah.
So this building's been really well maintained.
It would be better. Those
Yeah.
are period
Yeah.
non-existent structures.
Yeah.
For
Right, so-
being over 100 years old, I
Well,
think
yeah.
it did, I don't know if my house will last 100 years,
That's a good point.
or especially a new build.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's just the maintained, we did not know the level of damage on that crown. Or when we had it re-roofed a few years back,
Mhm.
but there was never gutters, they just have that hole in there where the water goes.
And so
And so if we can direct it and keep it from running over the side of the building and doing, further damage, get a couple downspouts in the gutter system.
the plan for this is that it's going to be an internal gutter that's inside of that decorative crown. So the crown's going to look the same. You won't see a gutter. So it's not like it's going to be a gutter hanging off the outside of the crown.
No.
It'll be interior to it, and then it'll run to these downspouts. And those downspouts are going to be color matched to the extent that we can, so that they'll be added, but most people won't really notice. That's the
From
idea.
street, there'll be no gutter.
From the street, the gutter should be completely invisible based on the way we're anticipating.
And the downspout on the other side will go out back.
Yeah.
So it's not gonna be, we do have to have one.
Right. So there's one downspout that kind of goes where the more contemporary expansion area is, that's on that north face towards the west. And so it'll be over where the addition was. So hopefully it's not on the corner of the building where it would be pretty prominent. So that would be kind of hiding it. And then the other gutter is going to be
By that.
kind of on the rear corner next to the alley. So, but it'll only, sorry, not gutter, but downspout. So hopefully those will be, not too obtrusive. All right, so now we're going to get into the criteria that we're used to evaluate these. So these are items that were all evaluated in the staff report, and we're really walking you through some of these. And I have to say, we wrote this up, and initially this was circulated a month ago. So I haven't looked at these slides again a whole lot since then. So, but it's fairly similar in that the type of procedure that was required, that's what we're talking about, this first slide that talks about the historic district under the section 344.030 relating to exterior alterations. And so in some cases, if they're considered minor alterations, they go through a type 1, which is just administrative review. And so that's what's happened recently with like some window changes at the Ruddock and Wood building and even at the library. But this is more significant. So this exceeded what was considered minor. So it needed to come to the Historic Preservation Commission. So this criteria is met by bringing it to this commission. So that's kind of the procedural way of meeting the criteria.
This, sorry.
Go ahead.
The criteria,
Mhm.
this is generic criteria that will apply to anything,
This would be, so
apply to any kind of,
for a historic landmark, there are certain criteria that we need to evaluate for characteristics on exterior alterations. So in that sense, yes. But for the procedure part of it, it kind of bifurcates it into two different procedures. And there's actually a third that's in it. I think the structuring is kind of bad, but basically there's a later section in the Historic District Code that's about general maintenance. And it's things that don't need to go through a type 1 or things that don't need to go through a type 3. They're just things that you can do. Things like painting the house and other things that are considered maintenance, basically. So you can do basic maintenance repairs. But once you start doing alterations to something, particularly something that is considered a historic feature associated with the historic structure, then that triggers either being considered a minor alteration or a more substantial one that needs Historic Preservation Commission review. And so some of those, like repairing and replacing a couple of windows at the library, was determined to be a type 1 because they're really trying to do as much like for like, including sending it to a historic restoration and wood specialist. But this, because we're not only changing these, even though the window spacing is staying the same, but we are doing a materials change. It triggered it going there. Plus, it's 35 windows.
The number.
Yeah.
The number was pretty substantial. And we wanted to make sure, again, that the city, if we did it internally, couldn't be accused of not following its own rules. So if there's going to be a point where it could be this or it could be that, we should probably try and go to the higher when it's reasonable to do so. And it seemed reasonable based on just the size of it. And it's a very prominent, there's only one city hall in town, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's held government services for over 100 years in some capacity, even though it's the fire department, some other stuff before. So that's the kind of procedure side of what we're required to do. Then as we go to the next slide, it talks about exterior alterations. It's subsection A1 and A2. So average setback and architectural elements are discussed. We're not changing the average setback. Some of the main the architectural elements are going to be maintained to the main extent that we can. So it kind of discusses here and brings up some of the language from the code about these various styles. The design shall incorporate architectural elements in the city's historic styles, including Queen Anne, Colonial Revival, Dutch Colonial, bungalow styles, and whatnot. So this, we're actually trying to maintain the historic structure that it's got to the extent possible, but still have that building perform better, especially since the things that are being removed and are not doing an exact replacement, that we're trying to make them so we're not removing period pieces. So we felt that this was a reasonable modification that we're going to try and mitigate the look and the feel of that change while enhancing the building's performance. On the next one, A3, 5, and 3, 4, and 5. So building orientation, that's not going to be changed. Everything stays the same. The vehicle parking and storage, that does not change because that's not part of what we're doing on this project. Fences. So these are things that in the staff report we looked at, but in these cases, some of them just weren't relevant, but especially because last month when we were trying to bring this, I knew that this was quasi-judicial. We knew we were preparing it for a commission that hasn't seen this stuff too often, and it's a big structure. I wanted to highlight that these exist, and we looked at them. Some of them just didn't apply. Fences, not applicable. Vehicle parking and storage, not going to change. Building orientation, it's going to remain the same. Section, now we're going to other subsections for B, C, D, and E are highlighted here. So this property, it's for section B that says each property shall be recognized as a physical record of its place, time, and use. So one of the things is you do kind of have to pick a time and stick to it. You cannot represent 1910 and 1950 simultaneously, most likely. So at some point when you decide what it's going to reflect, you have to kind of pick it. And we're trying not to change that with these. So we're not changing that crown. We are trying to make changes to an internal gutter that will be hidden, so you're not really going to see it. So we're not adding things where we don't have to, but we are adding a few things where we think they're important to the long-term maintenance and care of the building, like those downspouts, and doing some of these as market windows rather than the windows we've had before, but making sure that they're using materials that we can customize so we get the same glazing and layout for those windows, so that to a typical observer, that landmark is still that landmark, still reflected in that period of time. The brickwork and those sorts of things all stay the same. Item C kind of highlights changes that have acquired historic significance in their own right shall be retained and preserved. Sorry, I want to go back to B for a moment. That also says changes that create a false sense of historical development, such as adding conjectural features or architectural elements from other buildings, shall not be undertaken. I keep using Disney. If there are any Disney fans, I apologize. It's just the best version I have, but you don't want to Disney your historic structures. So you don't want to guess what history would have been like and kind of go for it, or do an addition and pretend it's historic because it never existed. It's not really historic. So you're trying not to do that. And we don't think that we're doing that in this case. Distinctive features, finishes, and construction techniques are examples of craftsmanship that characterize historic property shall be preserved to the greatest extent possible. We feel like we're doing that, particularly with that decorative crown. It would be a lot easier just to put in some flashing, but that would be pretty noticeable to anyone that cares about that historic landmark. And so one of the things that we decided to do is do that historic remove and replace to have something like an incorporated gutter that's going to be hidden from view. So turning that feature, which is arguably kind of contributing to wear and tear, and make it something that hopefully it'll help steward the lifespan of that building. Deteriorated historic structure shall be repaired rather than replaced. Again, that crown would be a great example. And then for some of the windows, trying to stick with that glazing and layout and those sorts of things. So we are changing some materials, but we're trying to keep that look and feel. On the next one, so some of these others, chemical treatments, this is F, G, H, and I of 344.030A. Chemical or physical treatments such as sandblasting that cause extensive damage to historic materials shall not be used. Kind of goes on to talk about that a little bit. We're not anticipating doing anything particularly harsh with this. Significant archaeological resources shall be protected and preserved. We don't believe there are any that are affected by this. Go ahead.
We kind of, for some of those that weren't there last meeting, we kind of covered that last meeting about not using harsh things on your historical buildings.
Right. Yeah. And I think that was that the state folks when they were, did they give their presentation? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I thought that was really good.
Yeah, they did. It was a really good presentation.
Yeah, there are often alternatives available. Some might not be as effective. Some you might have to, basically, they might be harder to use or more costly because they're less effective, but you don't want to damage your structure by trying to save it to death.
Yeah.
New additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction shall not destroy the historic character of the property. We don't feel like the changes are doing that. We feel like this is good for the long-term lifespan and still recognizes it as what it is and gets to continue being. So kind of a living piece of history. And then new additions and adjacent related new construction. And it goes on to talk about that. Nothing here would really be considered a new addition or adjacent construction because we're not adding stuff to it. We're rehabilitating, doing remove and replace. I should say the only additions we're doing are not additions to the building. They're additions of a gutter, 2 downspouts. Everything else is remove and replace. Then the next one goes into talk a little bit about is where we get into. So that stuff was all the historic overlay requirements. And so that's the criteria we looked at and said, are we doing these? To what extent are we doing them? And those were discussed in the findings section of the staff report that you all received. The civic corridor was also evaluated. So this is a little outside of what will often come to your group for these sorts of things, but was still relevant here. And the civic corridor is kind of, there are a lot of historic structures in that civic corridor area. So this talks about the base field and crown for new or redeveloped buildings. This one will be neither new or redeveloped. We're just doing repairs to it. All street facing facades shall be clearly divided into 3 separate elements. I would argue that our building is, and we're not changing them. So we felt that that was met. The street facing facade articulation. So there is a fair bit of cornice treatment, first floor detail, and those sorts of things. I think this is, even though it's not commercial, it's a public building rather than the commercial buildings. It still has that first floor, second floor. It's got some of those details kind of distinguishing those areas so that you can see those. So and none of those are also changing in this one. So that's not a problem for what we believe is going on for this particular project. And then portion C for the development standards about street facing windows, depths of windows. We're not modifying the depths of windows and how much they're going to be recessed. So those shadow lines, that articulation of what you see in the window, we're trying to keep to that as much as possible. So we're trying to keep all that stuff the same. And then portion D, street facing facade materials. Obviously the facade here is predominantly brick, which is what it says it shall be for this. Allowed accent materials include horizontal wood, horizontal board and batten, shingles, shake. So we're not changing any of that stuff. So we didn't feel that any of that was a problem. And then changes in materials, that would be when we see kind of the brick and color change around the corners and those sorts of things. So we don't have any of those changing as part of this project either. They'll all remain the same. So with that, we're asking that the commission move to adopt Historic Preservation Commission Order 2024001, which approves the requested.
Yeah. Can I ask one quick question?
Yeah, you have many questions.
Probably had done one, but you were mentioning earlier about market windows. What are market windows?
If you go back to when
it's a style. It's a style and an opening.
Okay,
right.
That's all I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't know what
it's that style of window.
Okay.
Right. It's the ones that are the oversized windows that you see in the addition or what used to be the hook stables. Those are all market windows now.
Okay.
And so it'll become those. So they'll match with those as opposed to matching with the whatever they used in the 1990s.
I don't know where they got those.
Will they open?
They will not.
They will not.
And some of that is, so some of that is a change from what some of these windows used to do historically, but as a government building that's used as a workplace where we have secure files and we have security and things like that, some of that is a want of the city that we think that'll be a security and safety enhancement.
Okay, great.
Don't know if they purposely opening it, maybe one.
I don't think they do,
I mean,
unless they do it.
I'm sure
They didn't do it,
originally, yeah,
No.
because it was when it got hot, but now it's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
air conditioned. So,
Right.
That's right.
yeah, it has what?
That's why the jail was in the basement, so it stayed cool.
Yeah.
Really?
Well, it's probably more secure.
The basement and where
Well, I know it's cooler, but
where my cubicle is, it used to be a jail cell. It used to be, it actually
you
used to
think
be.
that's a coincidence, huh?
Yeah.
Not a metaphor.
There actually used to be a door on Howard. And you go down in the basement, that's where the police were, they had a little window.
I'm hoping that these end up in the same place they were before, but
Yeah.
there are some really cool blueprints on the inside of City Hall. If you go into the addition area where they've got the exposed brick on the inside of the building.
Yeah.
And so some of those blueprints, if people haven't seen them, they're pretty cool. I think those are like a complete gem for looking at, and they show what things were in different areas. So you can see where the billiards room was.
Oh, that's cool.
I've heard,
Isn't that on the blueprint? A billiards room of some sort? Am I making that up?
I don't know if that was actually our city, because in 97, I think, or 98, when I was on the private side, we had to go in there and do a complete elevation topo of every floor.
Mhm.
I don't remember seeing it though.
There was something, for what I'm thinking, that I could have sworn there was a billiards room depicted somewhere in there, and it might have been something older than the 1990
Yeah.
blueprints that came, perhaps,
Yeah.
that Steve Olson had shown me.
Yeah.
So, but there are some really cool
I don't
historic
know what
documents
happened in
associated
the
with
basement,
it.
but.
Year was that originally built, just out of curiosity?
1913, I believe.
Yep. George Howland was the architect.
Is the original window design known? Or has that just been lost over time?
I don't know.
Okay.
Because all I was able to go back is fine. I think the design of the rectangle,
Mhm.
or that kind of market, if you will.
Yeah.
Style of window. Yes.
Okay.
I believe it's the same.
Okay.
But as far as like, were they double hungs? I'm sure they were obviously single pane.
Yeah.
Were they just a piece glazed with, did they have the French out? I don't know. I doubt they did. I'm sure it was just one piece of glass.
I was thinking it would have been nice to have some pictures like
It would have
from the
been cool.
1920s or so.
But
Yeah.
And I mean, I know those pictures exist, but
Yeah.
I think anything that I've seen has always kind of had that same shape.
Yeah.
And so we're mimicking what's there, which I believe they tried to do in 99 where the crossbars are in the windows, that's what we're.
I was going to say, some of them, if you look at the historic resource survey form that's in the presentation, some of them are the same. So it's hard to tell the extent to which they're the same, because you look at the north elevation, you look at the upper windows to the sides, those look like those may have different outlines, but the ones that are centered over the door look like they're the same kind of
See how
strange longitudinal long
window,
panes and then
window.
smaller panes on the
So I
sides,
tried to
and
do
similar above the
those.
double door. But it looks like they may have had a different
Yeah.
glazing layout,
even
There,
that
but-
picture though, that was probably taken in the 90s when this resource was put together.
perhaps.
So,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's hard to know.
and it's
So-
changed quite a lot.
Yeah, and this would have been
Could've
late
been.
80s.
What's the street sign?
Yeah.
No right turn.
No right turn would
Yeah,
be,
so
and
that
that
was
would be
that-
from the 80s survey.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
after, because it never used to be.
So I don't
Never
know
used to
that
have
that,
two one ways.
we were pretty focused on trying to keep with what we have there now.
Okay.
So we didn't try and do some of those studies to go backwards that much further.
Yeah, I think if we were a different community that was really hyper focused on, then we'd be talking more about like the size of the mullions or whatever the cross sections are called, like how thick those are.
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
that if we would have been that community,
Yeah,
that's what would be there from the 99 remodel,
yeah.
because every window was replaced in 99. So,
The cornice, will it be completely rebuilt or?
yeah,
Yeah, and
Because are we taking it all the way back on both faces?
the crown, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I wish it'd fall off. We could just put a ledger board up there. It'd be a lot easier, but it's not gonna look cool. So Preston down at maintenance has talked to some contractors And there's enough good pieces for like, if you, that the piece underneath, I guess like the kicker,
Mm-hmm.
it's more decorative than kind of
Yeah.
anything else. There's good ones of those that we can go and get made.
And
So
is the
they're
new-
gonna have to mill. You're not gonna find it. It's gonna be handmade.
And that was my question, is it the profile is gonna be the same, because there's that built up molding at the top
Mhm.
of it, that'll be all the same. Will it be wood or a different material?
It's not wood now.
It's,
Oh, what is
Right?
it now?
it is,
I thought it was wood going through and then it was, I thought he thought it was aluminum.
it had some kind of, I don't know what it is up on top. It's going to be, I thought we were using wood, but that's where the flashing's gonna come in,
Okay,
Okay,
where the,
No.
on the top, which
yeah.
even
No,
flying
no.
over, you're never gonna,
And,
it's got some kind of a thin sheet metal,
all right, that's what he.
someone, I wanna say they tried to cobble it.
mhm.
Probably helped make it last a little bit longer, but it wasn't the right way to do it.
And Preston had indicated he can't tell how old it is, but he felt that the sheet metal components and some of the others were pretty old.
Yeah.
And he questioned, he found it a little hard to believe, but he thought some elements of that might be original. You'd find it real hard to believe that all of them were original,
Mhm.
but he thinks that it has been kept together. And so he does think that they can rebuild it so that it's awfully similar. And so it is,
That was my biggest question, was would the profile remain the same? Yeah.
that is the goal. And that is what, I mean, as far
Yeah,
as
it'd
I've
be
heard,
easy to go out there, knock it off, put in a 4x4 to hold it up, you know,
Yeah.
that's not right.
Yeah.
It's going to get milled, it's gonna look the same, it's gonna have the stacked moldings, the trim.
Cool.
And hopefully that doing this when this project happens and it's successful, that it gets to be something where we can get that as an opportunity to kind of celebrate restoration of a landmark in the city and use that to kind of bring focus to the good things that you can do with historic resources and that people can really appreciate them for being unique.
Is this building on the National Register or just a local? historic
Just local.
landmark?
But we would still be eligible for some of the historic resource grants and things like that, but probably more for those. I think the city has some concerns about how much harder does it make our lives to have a living, working building?
Yes,
And
of
the
course.
cost implications with that way. You can recoup some of the costs, but it becomes a bit of an unknown, so it's a balance. And I think typically our city government has been uncomfortable with kind of taking it further.
Oh, yeah, no, I was more curious
Yeah.
just from like a regulatory, like the Windows things to touch me. I'm working on another project that is a National Register building. And
Yeah.
The book came in and like shut us down and changed our whole window plan.
Okay.
Yeah, so, but we're not National Register, so
No,
that definitely
we're not.
impacts that.
And that would be the kind of reason where we do want some of the flexibility to respect the historic resource, make sure it still continues to be appreciated and valuable historic landmark, but also it'd be nice to be able to do something. And I just went and looked too recently. I had to go to a board meeting at the school district, and all of the windows in that building appear to be market windows, kind of like this one. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but it's good to me to say, okay, so others have done this too. This isn't so out of left field. But your all's interest, you guys may have different experiences and thoughts too on these things, but this is really where we're coming from, and you don't have to agree with us. We'd like you to agree with us, but you don't have to.
Well, we're kind of in our deliberation phase.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's.
Did you end the public
That's fine.
comment?
So
And-
we haven't received any public comments.
No.
We didn't get any other agency comments from ours. We did check with other folks in the city, but again, it's kind of a joint application. And so those haven't been received. So I think we can, and there's no one here. Is there anyone else virtual?
No.
Okay, so no public comments. So
So we're in the deliberation.
you're in the deliberation, public hearing's closed.
So I'll say that with windows are a pet peeve of mine with historic preservation. A lot of folks in historic preservation get really obsessed with windows. And I am passionate about historic preservation, but a window can, if we put in market windows and 50 years from now, we decide we really want to have what the original windows look like, we can still do that. We don't lose anything by putting in some market windows today. And I've seen, like I said, I lived in Charleston, South Carolina, which has a really strict and rigorous historic preservation laws and regulations and committees. And they they've told people who owned a house, third floor window was rotted out, storm water's coming in. They said, no, you can't put in a vinyl window to stop the rainwater from coming into the house. And that's, I would never say that to a homeowner, and I wouldn't say that to the city.
I know you closed public comment, but if you do look at that one photo, it was from the 80s. And these windows got replaced in 99.
Yeah.
They look like the photo. And we're matching the grid lines
Yep.
and everything with them to try to keep that look.
Your staff, you're allowed to talk to them.
Oh, that's good clarification that you all
I'm not really staff. I was an applicant or what was, I don't know.
Your staff. It's a co-staff presentation.
Co-staff.
You're okay.
What was that, Britta?
So you are gonna match the existing lines in the windows?
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
We're not, yeah.
we want the vast majority of people to walk by the building to not notice that anything changed.
Perfect, love that.
So that's the goal.
Yeah.
And we want people that are across the street to literally not be able to tell the difference because
Yeah.
the color match of the materials won't be visible and the layout's the same.
Great.
But if you went up, you'd be like, oh, something, they changed the windows.
If you
I
walk
couldn't tell
by
from across the
tonight-
street. That's what I would like to see.
And not know which windows I'm replacing, which windows are already there. I don't know if you'd know.
Yeah, no, that's great. Cause I care a lot less for a project of this level that's not National Register. I care a lot less about the materials, more about the look. And if it's going to look exactly the same as what's there now, I think that makes a lot of sense to move forward with that.
And one of the slides that we showed in there, we tried to do the side by side on these 1990 era windows and the existing market windows. And so that's one of the other things too, is that we already have some that are a newer, that market style that's used a metal aluminum framing, but the color and tone should be the same, still flat, still that like brownish, blackish, kind of muted color that's still going to look good with brick. But you know, the things that to me make the building kind of pop, the returns on the brick and the colors and the keystones that come over the archways and the windows and those sorts of things. I mean, obviously none of those are going to change, but it just lets us continue to have this building and hopefully have the building a lot.
No, I think if you've done windows, most windows come on from the outside and have that flashing line.
Mm-hmm.
These will get removed from the inside and be pushed back. So we're not having to chip away to pull that flashing nail or anything else. Because
I didn't even think about that.
yeah.
Yeah, and like the gutters are gonna be an addition, but again, I wouldn't tell a homeowner, no, you can't put in a downspout. And
And I think we tried really hard to get the one out front to go at that addition line from the
Yeah.
middle.
Mhm.
The one in the back to be tucked at that back corner.
and I don't feel like it would change the character of the building, you know.
I'm
most folks-
hoping you're gonna see that there's a gutter.
Yeah.
And it's always been there.
And most folks don't notice gutters and downspouts, so they're not gonna notice a downspout.
Well, and hopefully you'll have an invisible gutter. And so when people see the
Invisible, yeah.
downspout, they'll be like, where's the gutter? Because I mean, it should be in that decorative crown and maybe they'll.
I
piece it
tried
together.
just to see if they would let me do the flashing on that crown and just let it go over.
It'll be the staff's little secret about the gutter thing.
The only ones that are gonna get wet are the ones standing underneath it.
Brian, I do have a
Didn't-
question.
yes.
Is, when you were looking at making this proposal, was there anything that the staff was discussing that they wanted to have that did not get put into this proposal? So this is pretty rounded out, representing what the majority of the staff who had input into this.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
The only, I think one that had a comment was someone on the third floor says if they did try to open the window, if they could get past their little bookshelf, they had to beat it to get it closed. That was even before the flood. So we'll eliminate that, which isn't safe.
And some of the
To
maintenance
be
staff did
leaning
note
out the
that,
window beating on
Right,
it from the
yeah.
third.
some of the maintenance staff did note that not putting the crown back would be a lot easier.
Oh, it would be.
Oh, sure.
He said
Yeah.
that would be
Yeah.
very, very visible. And that's probably
To me, that's lazy. And it's because you don't have craftsmanship.
I'd let them know from the planning perspective that we would have no way of defending that and would basically have to say in here that the criterion is not met. And I wouldn't know a way around writing that. We'd still have to bring it to you, which is the whole point on the
Yeah.
accountability is we'd have to kind
Well,
of fess up.
Why we're here too, because if someone down the road wants to do that, and we did it,
Yeah.
what leg do you have to stand on? You don't, well, you guys did it, why can't we?
Exactly.
So with that crown, is the like full extent of potential damage known, or at least are you prepared
Well,
for
we
there to
found-
be
I
more
don't believe
damage
there's
once it's removed?
I don't believe there's structural damage behind it.
Okay, okay.
From
You
what,
always run it, you take it off and you're like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I didn't know that was.
Yeah, I
Exactly,
think
yeah.
that they're anticipating there will be some deterioration interior where they can see that things are damaged,
Okay.
but they're really not gonna know
I
until they
don't,
get it.
and if there is, my approach to it is gonna be, we're gonna repair that from the inside.
Okay.
We're not touching bricks from the outside to be able to get to it to repair it.
Right.
Right.
Are there any hazardous material concerns with the crown?
I don't believe so. I know they went and did a bunch of testing in the building for asbestos and lead, and I think it came back good. I don't think they had any.
Interesting.
You would know better than I
I
would.
think they took care of all that in '99.
That
Okay.
makes sense. Okay,
Yeah,
that
so
would work.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
I was like, for the time that building was built, that's
Yeah.
a little
because
weird.
I've been
that it
here,
came
I've been
back
here
completely.
15 years. And I've had the same office downstairs, and I know they went through and did asbestos and mold testing because one of our staff had allergies.
A radon.
I don't think they had anything, went through and did. They had monitors everywhere and every
Yeah.
vent and all that stuff just to make sure.
Sure.
It's like, well, you have allergies.
Yeah.
Well, are we ready for a motion?
So,
You wanna move this time?
sure, yeah, I will move to adopt Historic Preservation Commission Order 2024-001, which approves this requested historic review.
Second that. That's
Seconded by Brian. Good job.
We've got a
All right.
motion in a second.
All right.
Let's
Melissa,
do the
you help
roll.
us with the roll vote when you're ready.
Charles Johnson,
Approved.
Britta Mansfield,
Approved.
Bob Woodruff,
Approved.
Deborah Berkel,
Approved.
and Brian Strom.
approved.
Passes unanimously.
Cool.
Good job. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, that was very
Thank
well
you.
done, giving us two in one meeting that were two softballs that were pretty easy to deal with.
I mean,
That was some good
I'm
planning.
glad that you feel they were softballs, because, I mean, we think that what we brought forward is justified, but we haven't done a lot of these with your
Mhm.
commission. It could have been
Mhm.
that 3 out of 5 of you hated what we were suggesting or thought that, I don't care that those windows are from 1990. You need to rebuild the whole thing. I want to see counterweights. I
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
see this and that, and I don't care about the security and safety.
Yeah, yeah.
And we just don't know those things. But, and that's part of, and that level of subjectivity, that's supposed to happen.
So let me ask you this. If you were to vote that way. And
If-
say, put back her, you touch.
If we denied it and said this is why we're denying it.
I'm 99% sure that we would stick with what we have. Because of budgetary reasons to try to actually rebuild that.
Well, that would be one tactic, but we could
But
also,
we
the
can't,
city could appeal the Historic Preservation Commission's decision to the city.
as I
council.
would,
Well, and realistically, if we thought it was a big project and we're like, oh,
Yeah.
but they might have the same concerns.
They
They might
could,
see,
yeah.
maybe there was a reason our Historic Preservation Commissioners felt this way. And, you know, if we showed them something and we'd had in the staff report, for example, some things didn't meet the criteria, like we had said, well, we could have put the crown back, but we thought it was going to be too hard, so we said no. And
Yeah.
and you guys said no. We will approve it with it, so you could have conditioned it, so that it said,
there you go. That's-
we're going to modify your project, now you're required to put it back. And even if it was approved, but with that condition, we, the city, could, as the applicant, still go to the city council, and then they'd have a chance to get it and say, no, we agree with the Historic Preservation Commission. You should have put the elements on there. It's part of what makes it what it is. So that's kind of how that could play out in different ways. But yeah, you're completely entitled to change the project, deny the project, or say, sure, we think you guys did a good job, which is great for us to hear, because until tonight, we don't know that you're necessarily going to think it's a particularly good
Yeah,
idea.
yeah. No, like I said, personally, these both to me were softballs. These were easy.
Well, I come in here as, like, say, as an applicant, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
What your triggers are, what your
We don't have a
agenda
we don't have a
is.
track
You
record.
don't have it.
Nobody in town knows how we react to applications, because we haven't done it. So that's why, I said, and I'll say to anybody, I want our reputation to be that we are passionate about preserving our history, but we're also, work with property.
No, and I
owners to be able
think
to
I came
develop
in
their
here very
property.
open-minded.
Yeah.
No, and what I got from you all was the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Well done.
Yeah, thank you.
I just wish I would
Thank
have known,
Clay.
I could have just denied it then.
Exactly, right? Be like, oh, I had a lot more leeway. And
I had more power than I thought.
Pound sand.
You do get the groups where there will always be one person to deny it.
Yeah.
It's not always unanimous.
And there will be those times
There
where
will
we
be.
don't, we might not, there should be times when we don't all agree on something.
And hopefully no one takes that personal if
No.
that does come to happen. And
That's why we have to have a quorum, so two people don't make the decision for the whole group.
Right, yep.
I thought this was pretty easy because this is only my second meeting on this commission, so I thought it was pretty easy myself.
Yeah.
Not knowing anything at all, really.
Yeah.
we'll let you go to council, present something to council sometime
There
when you don't have a budget.
we go.
Oh, I've sat at a few city council meetings, so I think it helped me have a perspective of kind of how these meetings work, even though they're different, they're not different, if that makes sense.
No, and I always say, any level of local government, it's either fascinatingly boring or boringly fascinating.
Well, I think Newburgh,
It's equal parts of the two.
I think we're a little odd compared to a lot of the other cities because I had to jump through the hoops just as a developer did for us in the building. I don't think you see that in a lot of other cities.
I think you meant to say you got fantastic customer service.
I
and
did
support
get fantastic customer
from
service.
planning, collaboration,
The PowerPoint was awesome that I didn't make.
friendly service.
Yep.
It's appreciated.
No,
So the public works
I'm
department
not
was very
bitter.
welcome.
No, I mean, don't take it that way, but it's good. Cause it also sets precedents too, cause I'm in engineering. I'm not
Mhm.
really, I'm not,
Yeah, this is a little outside.
Yeah, yeah.
Maintenance kind of cares for the facility. I mean, you know this, but for anyone that doesn't know with those roles.
I got
engineering's not what
told to help out with this.
Mhm.
So, which is good because it also helps set the precedent. So if they want to do something next time, hey, it's what I had to do.
Yep.
Doesn't matter if I'm in a different department or whatever else.
So we've got, we've got two more things on our agenda.
I'm leaving. Thank you.
Yeah.
You guys have a great
Right.
weekend.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
Well,
Given the time, I think we'll punt on talking too much about our 5-year plan. But we do need to talk about what to do with our applicant on the,
It's a garage addition to a residential landmark.
A garage addition.
So it's a historic residential home that's not too far from here. They want to do a garage addition. They actually about 20 years ago did a different addition on the home. And so they're planning on matching this. So they've had a carport sitting there for 15 or 20 years and they would like to turn it. And the woman who lives there said she's lived there long enough, she's getting to a certain age. She would just like to have an attached garage instead of a carport. And she wants it to match the addition. So it won't be the historic landmark, 20 years ago looks like one thing and then now looks like yet a different thing. So 3 things. It'll be that there's the historic landmark portion and then there's these things that match. So that's what they're going for in this. Your next meeting is scheduled for August. They're ready to go. They'd kind of like to get going. So they've asked for it to be somewhat sooner. It just lets them get going and use more of the construction season and kind of mobilize people and put them on. So they're willing to take the August date. They understand that. They understand that's your regular meeting. They would be pleased to have an earlier date. And I'm trying to what I put in here. So our team can be ready as early as July 24th. Even July 24th, we're going to have to hustle up a little bit, but we can do it. And that gives them time to do their public noticing too. So they'll have to notice. So most of these things that come to you, we put a notice in the graphic when it's quasi judicial. And we also, the applicant that included the city, that included the moving review from that point where the historic landmark is now, because the landmark that was doing the moving review. We just did it from the point of origin, not the point of destination. Because it seemed kind of speculative and not merited yet. For this one, same thing, it would be a 500-foot radius from the property, and they would just notice neighbors, and so they do a mailer.
I can tell you right now, I can't do it on that date, 24th. I can do it either the day before or the day after.
What day of the week do you all typically meet now?
Do we have a typical?
Okay,
Yeah,
that was one of the questions I had. I don't know
we-
if you had decided it.
We haven't said that whole week, that's the week of the old fashioned festival, so that week would be.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't work for me then. Oh,
Well, the 24th is a Wednesday, so it's kind of in the middle of the week.
Yeah,
So
well,
go
the
ahead.
the Wednesday's prep, but then Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the festival week, that's busy.
Okay.
I'm available the 23rd and 24th, just putting that out there.
What about the following week?
So July 29th through August 2nd.
I'm gone then.
What about the next week?
I could do Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday.
I'm available the 23rd or the 24th. I would be available for those 2 days. But I'm actually helping with someone setting up at the festival. So
Let's go forward a couple. I think we're at the week of August 5th through 9th. Is that what I've heard?
Okay.
Because Charles was at least.
Yeah,
okay.
5th, 6th, 7th, I'm available.
I'm open as well.
Yeah, I could do any, well, except for Wednesdays.
Wednesdays are hard
I
for
have
you.
a standing, I'm a ministry leader for a recovery group on Wednesdays. so-
Okay.
5th, 6th, 8th then.
8th, I'm out. But
Okay.
6th would be
So
great.
5th and 6th are looking good.
That whole week, I would be available.
Okay. What time of evening do you typically prefer to start? Is the 7 o'clock the preferred? Is it 6 o'clock preferred? Is it 5 o'clock preferred?
6 or later would be great.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
6,
same.
I'd love to go earlier than.
Yeah.
Let's do 6 then. If you're
Yeah.
available by 6, that'll work.
Melissa, does that tend to work for you and Rachel?
Yeah, 6 will be fine.
Okay.
Seven's kind of late to get started and keep you all here.
And did-
so.
We said so far it's been the 5th or the 6th?
6.
6th,
6,
6 p.m. on a
Great.
6th.
August
'Cause-
6th, 6 p.m.
which is great because the 5th wouldn't have worked because city council's that night.
Right.
And they're in this room. Not that, so if needed in the future, it's possible we could find a different room if needed, but it's the reliability of using this one consistently is pretty nice.
Well, and for staff, I think, because you generally are gonna have something.
Well, we used to have a third option where we had one of the downstairs conference room in City Hall, but that's not available right now.
But I mean, just,
And then, yeah, well, that's the thing is prep here tends to be easier. We've used the library has a meeting room too, which can be very nice. Our urban renewal agency uses it, but I think the audio and stuff is better here.
Yeah, the audio is better, and we could do it because we have the meeting out, we have different technologies that we can use.
Right.
The only issue is, if Rachel and I need to be
yeah,
at the city council meeting, or at least one of us do. So, I mean, we
Oh, that's
could
right.
make it work because
we'll cross that
one
bridge
and
if
one
we
would
ever come
be,
to it.
yeah.
I can't envision where we'd have to have a critical
Mhm.
meeting the same day as city council.
Well, I feel like it's
Yeah.
nice to have us as commissioners available to view the city council meeting.
Yeah.
Like, not that I watch all of them.
No,
but
no,
it's
but I hear what you're
nice to
saying.
have plugged in
Yeah.
people able to do those, so.
Okay.
Agreed. So August 6th, 6 p.m. I will get that to Rachel.
Okay.
6 p.m. works the best for me because my dad's work schedule and he doesn't want to stay up too late while I'm out of the house. So
I mean, I personally agree with your dad.
We all do.
The sooner we can get you all home, the better.
and I try to have a certain bedtime too. So it just works if it's at 6, because then if the meeting has to go for 2 hours, I'll be home before 9.
Well,
Yep.
Anything else for the good of the order before we adjourn?
Actually, with respect to the conversation on your work plan, since we'll agendize that and the quasi judicial review, is there anything else that you would like to see on that agenda or that would help you prepare for that discussion for your work plan?
I think we already have the basic information about
I think so.
what we're charged to do as a commission.
Yeah.
I think that's our framework, right?
Yeah.
I think the rest of it is based on the discussion that we had
Mhm.
a couple of meetings ago, and I'd like to follow those directions. I'm wondering, Bob, is it possible that if we have thoughts about things and want to like introduce some new ideas, that maybe we do that via email or something beforehand?
No, we can't do that because we
Okay.
can't deliberate. Send
That's
it
right.
to Rachel.
Okay.
Right.
And then she'll disperse it out
She'll
and,
disperse it.
yeah.
Okay,
Because,
perfect.
because that way, think of it just like public comments. It would
Right.
just
Yeah.
be your correspondence, but that way the public gets to see those too. If anyone wants to get engaged or make a comment.
Yeah.
Then, I don't know exactly how she would organize those when I've, commissioned or not chaired. Been the liaison to committees like this. If I've got that internal stuff where the commissioner said, please share this with the commission, then I would send it out and then I would add it to the correspondence and that would actually show up in the packet again, even though you all have already seen it.
Perfect.
But it kind of consolidates that
Yeah.
nicely too.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you do have thoughts, I think that's
No, and
appropriate to
if you
share.
do, if anybody has those thoughts, things they really, send that to Rachel. She'll get it to Clay and they'll know ahead of time what your questions, interests are.
Mhm.
With that, I will adjourn the meeting.
All right.